Ladies and gentlemen, live from downtown Toronto, welcome to the 110th season of the Canadian Club of Toronto and the 30th anniversary of our annual Outlook Luncheon with the National Post. My name is Noella Milne, and I'm the President of the Canadian Club and today's host. Before we begin today's program, I would just like to take a moment and let our television viewers know that they can be part of our live audience for each Canadian Club lunch by ordering tickets through our office at 416-364-5590 or by visiting our website at canadianclub.org. The Canadian Club's next event is next Monday, January the 15th, when we are pleased to host author and leading business strategist Don Tapscott, who will share insights from his best-selling new book, which looks at how the smartest companies create value through mass collaboration. On Friday, January the 19th, we shift our focus from business to personal safety as we host Stan Griffin, President and CEO of the Insurance Bureau of Canada, who joins us to talk about the issue of driver distractions and what we should be doing about them. So check your BlackBerry, but not when you're driving, and join us for what promises to be a fascinating luncheon and one which might even save a life. For tickets and a complete listing of our events, please call 416-364-5590 or visit canadianclub.org. And now I'm going to introduce today's head table guests. Please stand as I call your name and remain standing until everyone has been introduced. And I will ask you, our live audience, to please hold your applause until the last person has been introduced. Starting on my far left, Peter Morton, Washington Bureau Chief, The Financial Post. Andrew Coyne, National Affairs Columnist, The National Post. Warren Jeston, Senior Vice President and Chief Economist, Scotiabank. Diane Francis, Editor-at-Large, The Financial Post. Terence Cochrane, Editor, The Financial Post. Earl Landy, President and CEO, Roy Knight Canada. David Asper, Chair of the National Post, and Peter Kent, Deputy Editor, Global News, and today's moderator. Before we get underway, I would like to take this moment to thank Roy Knight Capital and Scotiabank Commercial Banking for co-sponsoring today's lunch and the entire Outlook 2007 tour. Thank you both. I would also like to welcome a group of students to today's luncheon. They are from Loretto Abbey Catholic Secondary School, sponsored by Scotiabank. Students, would you please stand so we can recognize you? And thank you to Scotiabank for making it possible for them to attend. One more reminder to you all. Please take advantage of the question cards on your tables to submit a question to our panel. Time allowing, Peter will post them at the end of the lunch, and our volunteers will be around in a few minutes to start collecting them from you. And now I would like to get today's discussion underway. If you've followed the newspaper headlines of 2006 closely, you're probably exhausted. On the political front, we kicked off 2006 with the dramatic changing of the guard in Ottawa, a bit of an upset win for Stephen Harper. And we wrapped up the year with another political surprise, this time an upset win in the Liberal leadership race for Stéphane Dion. Between these bookends, Canada had an extraordinary year in many ways. The Canadian economy remained bullish in 2006, more so in parts of the country where bulls are more common than in Ontario, perhaps. But with a strong dollar and solid fundamentals, Canada was the envy of the G7 countries. And now to 2007. 2006 wasn't a peaceful year around the world. From the plains of Kandahar to the halls of Dawson College, violence and loss became familiar to Canadians. Will 2007 be a safer year? As to our economy, will the good fortunes of 2006 continue? Or is the Canadian economy in for a bumpy year, as some predict? Perhaps a soft landing is the best we can hope for. Suddenly, There are events we can predict more easily than others. I don't need a crystal ball to tell you that there will be a provincial election in Ontario this year. It also seems pretty certain that Canadian troops will continue to play a role in places like Afghanistan. As to where I might need my crystal ball, here are some of the questions that are harder to answer. Will there be a federal election? And if so, will there be a majority government for some party or another? As to our military, will they continue to play the same role they are committed to now in Afghanistan? Or will this change? And as to the economy, will the slower performance we experienced in the third and fourth quarters of 2006 lead the Bank of Canada to restate its position for 2007? And what about job creation in the months to come? There's a lot of interest on all of these issues, and that's why we are lucky to have, as our panel today, some of the best prognosticators in the business. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pride that I now turn things over to a very capable moderator, the Deputy Editor of Global News, Peter Kent, and get our 2007 Outlook Luncheon officially underway. Peter.
Thank you, Noella. Good afternoon, everyone. Bienvenue à tous, and thank you once again for joining us this afternoon. I'm delighted to play the role of moderator for this year's Outlook event and would like to thank the Canadian Club of Toronto and our presenting sponsors, Roynat Capital, a member of the Scotiabank Group, and Scotiabank Commercial Banking for inviting me to participate in today's program. As mentioned earlier by Earl, today's luncheon marks the launch of the 2007 National Post Outlook Luncheon Series Tour presented by Roynat Capital and Scotiabank Commercial Banking. Warren, Peter, and Diane are ready to once again embark on a whirlwind cross-country tour to participate in 7 more luncheon events over the next 2 weeks. In each city, they will be joined by local speakers, as well as some of their other National Post colleagues. I also get to join them for my first Outlook tour experience as moderator, something akin to campaign conditioning, and I'm counting for our panelists to show me the ropes. So please wish us luck. Also, please take note of the Roynat Capital poll cards that are on your tables and displayed on the screens. If you haven't already filled them out, you should do so in order to have your say about what should be considered Canada's greatest entrepreneur, and for a chance as well to win an Apple iPod Nano. This afternoon's program will proceed as follows. Each of our expert panelists will take to the podium to make their case and present their forecast for 2007. Following the final presentation, we'll open up the floor to you for our Q&A session. On your tables, as Noella mentioned, you will find blank note cards, which you can use to jot down your questions for any or for all of our panelists. Our student volunteers will be coming around later in the program to collect these cards from you and from your tables and to hand them off to me so that we can proceed with the Q&As. I encourage you to make good use of this opportunity to go one-on-one with our speakers. Now, without further delay, I'd like to first call upon Mr. Warren Jeston. Warren.
Thank you very much. Well, I've got about 6 minutes to summarize what's going to happen in the world over the next year or so I'm going to make 6 take-home points as to what we think are the most fundamental trends that are likely to develop. You're going to be reading a lot in the paper about the economy slowing down, and very clearly in Canada and the U.S., I think growth is going to be 2.5%, maybe even a little bit less. Better than in Europe, where growth is probably going to be around 2% or so, and in Japan a similar amount. When we talk about countries like China and India, however, it's an entirely different phenomenon. Yes, every year, it seems, over the last few years, economists have been standing up and saying that those economies are about to slow down. So I don't want to change that pattern. I'm going to tell you those economies are about to slow down. But at the end of the day, the degree of slowdown and the performance is entirely different than you're seeing in places like Canada and the U.S., because that means that China is going to go from over 10% growth to something slightly under 10% growth. And India, well, India may well be growing at 7.5% to 8%. a big multiple of what we're going to see and ever going to see, it seems to me, in this country over the rest of my business career. So slower growth in general, but the dichotomy between emerging economies and the mature industrial economies is going to continue. Now, if world growth is slowing, it's my view that inflation is going nowhere fast. We talk a lot about it. We see it in a few things. We see it in labor markets being very tight, and that's going to be around for a long time because we're all getting older, and the emerging labor force that's coming in, the younger labor force, is simply not growing at that rapid rate. So when we go forward, I think you're going to find unemployment rates over the next few years are a whole lot less than what we began to think was normal 10 years ago or 15 years ago or so. We've got to get used to that. But even with the pressure in some labor markets and in some industries on trying to find labor, commodity prices are off their peak. You're paying a lot less for gasoline now than you were paying a few months ago. Real estate markets, well, still buoyant, but prices are flat and perhaps slightly down in some markets. So that has diffused some of the inflationary momentum. And all you have to do is go to the consumer electronics stores to know that each and every month prices seem to be dropping. We're dealing in a very, very competitive world, and those prices are on a declining trend and likely to remain so. So overall, we think that inflation in Canada will probably be around Governor Dodge's comfort zone, 2%. And in fact, we think that if anything, you may see some relief in inflation in some areas, which suggests to me in a lower growth, lower inflation environment that interest rates will be dropping as well. Now, if you read what Governor Dodge is saying or statements out of the Fed, there's a fairly cautious tone. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't be surprised by mid-year or at the end of the summer that rates are down at least half a percentage point on both sides of the border. It's important to realize that in Canada, long-term costs of borrowing are already very, very low by historic standards. Our rates are lower than they are in the U.S. So there's no way, in my view, that higher interest rates are in store. In fact, lower interest rates will keep the economy going. The interest-sensitive sectors will get some relief there. The exchange rate, of course, is a wild card, and if you could hop in the Wayback Machine and see what I said a year ago, I was fearlessly forecasting that the Canadian dollar would go to 90 cents, and it seemed as though I was right for a while, but now, of course, the dollar is swooning, and the question is, where are we likely to see the currency going? Two things I'd like to mention on this. First, we got to get used to the volatility. Last year, from high to low, there was a 6 to 7 cent range, same thing the year before that. The 2 years before then, we had a 14% or 14 cent range high to low on the Canadian dollar. We're dealing in a much more volatile exchange rate and climate. But fundamentally, we believe that the U.S. dollar is more likely to go down than up over the long haul because of big problems in trade deficit and the like, and financing that trade deficit. And longer term, we believe that the commodity markets are going to be pretty strong because of the vibrant growth we're seeing in emerging economies, which suggests to us that oil may well average $60 a barrel. Natural gas may well be going higher this year as export availability begins to diminish. And putting all that together, our view is still that the Canadian dollar will more likely be higher than lower by the end of the year. What's the range? Well, near term, I wouldn't be surprised if we hit below 85 and down to 84, 83 cents. Why? Because the market is very negative about slowing growth, lower interest rates, the fact that commodity prices come off. But the long-term fundamentals suggest to me more upside than downside on the currency. Stay tuned. We'll find out over the next few months. On a regional basis, growth remains best in the West, and that's a story that's going to be around for some time, not only 2007, but beyond. The strength in Asia, the strength in commodity markets that's likely to be around, mega projects that are underway, multi-year mega projects that are now being delayed but aren't going to be scrapped. The migration that is flowing west, all will keep BC and Alberta at the top of the growth polls. In Ontario and Quebec, growth 2%, maybe even less, is in the cards. But we've got to remember that in most provinces in Canada, the unemployment rate is at or near historic lows. In fact, it's around 3% in Alberta, but it's still very low in parts of eastern Canada as well. Nova Scotia, Quebec, it is at record lows right now. So that while the economy in eastern Canada may not be growing at as gangbuster a rate as you're seeing out west, we're still seeing a lot of support coming from the service sector and from service sector growth in large urban centers. Auto advantages also we can't ignore. We have a secret weapon called public health care. It's worth about $1,200 a vehicle. We've got some expansion in Japanese auto plants and the like. which means that the industry is going through big adjustments here. All you have to do is go to Windsor and ride to places to see that. But we've got some important offsets. So when I summarize what's happening in the year ahead, lower interest rates, the result of low inflation and somewhat slower growth. Growth is best in the West, but don't forget that the GTA, the area in Ontario and even Eastern Canada, has got a lot of vibrance and buoyancy in the economy, and I believe that's going to be around for some time as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren. And for those in the audience who want some deeper background on Warren's full report, it will be available to you all at the end of our program. I'd now like to call Mr. Terence Corcoran to the podium. Terry.
Thank you very much, Peter. Now, before I give you my outlook for the year 2007, I want to go back to this time last year, to this very same event, and review my predictions for 2006. My first prediction was that the great RCMP investigation into alleged income trust leaks would produce zero results. Remember that the RCMP publicly announced that it was looking at the possibility of some institutional investors having leaked or having received leaked news and having profited from the event after Finance Minister Ralph Goodale announced new rules for income trusts. I predicted last year that nobody would be charged, and nobody has been charged, and nobody ever will be charged. My second prediction was that the Kyoto Protocol would be declared dead sometime during the year, probably in October. In October, in fact, Environment Minister Rona Ambrose told the House of Commons Committee that it is impossible for Canada to meet its Kyoto targets. Internationally, the Kyoto Protocol is technically dead and exists only as a rhetorical device for green activists and opposition parties to hammer the governments. Many countries will not meet their targets, and major developing nations are not part of the protocol, and a UN climate meeting in Nairobi in November failed to come up with a replacement for Kyoto after it lapses in the year 2012. My third prediction last year was that even if Stephen Harper and the Conservatives were to win the election, Canadians would see no significant tax cuts. The Tories would cut the GST, as they promised, but that would pretty much be the end of tax cuts. Finance Minister Jim Flaherty proved me right. Federal government tax revenue collection and spending have not changed appreciably under the Tories. Instead, Mr. Flaherty introduced a convoluted and nonsensical plan to reduce Canada's national debt to zero, not by actually reducing the national debt to zero, but by redefining the national debt. So I was right on these three predictions, and I mentioned them not so much to claim the achievement, although I'll stick around after the session and autograph your programs. But I mentioned them because these same three issues, tax cuts, income trusts, and Kyoto, continue to ride high on the Canadian political scene, and new predictions are in order. So these are the three same issues for 2007, and I have some fresh predictions. On tax cuts, the outlook is even grimmer than last year. The next Flaherty budget will contain no significant corporate or personal tax cuts. There will be transfers to the provinces to address the so-called fiscal imbalance, new subsidies through the giant national farm ethanol boondoggle, and a few tax measures that may benefit investors and some lower income people. But that's it. The Tories are moving to the left. Some call it the centre. Same thing. Now, nowhere is this move to the left more evident than in the party's train wreck rush to become the Tory Green Party of Canada. Now, I say train wreck because there is no foundation for the Prime Minister's constant references to the idea that Canada is some kind of an environmental backwater or a pathetic international laggard that has fallen behind the rest of the developed world. This is simply not true. The claim is based on the work of people like David Suzuki, who invented a ranking system that places Mexico at the top of the pile of OECD countries as the cleanest country, and it puts Canada at the bottom. Mr. Harper's strategy, though, is pretty clear. He's decided to align Tory policy with the Suzuki Group so as to blast the Liberals for creating the mess Suzuki claims exists. But this is a deadly flirtation, certainly for corporate Canada, but for all Canadians who believe in sound policy as opposed to the massive interventionism promoted by the likes of Suzuki. So here is what I think will happen. The Prime Minister and John Baird, the new Environment Minister, will forcefully drive home the message that Canada's 2012 Kyoto targets are unattainable and the Liberals are to blame. Mr. Harper did this over the weekend on CTV's Question Period. Now, this is a case in which my predictions come true even before I've made them. The Harper government will become a major, though, proponent of an international post-Kyoto agreement for the years 2012 and beyond. In the meantime, the government will introduce an aggressive program of green legislation and regulation. And now we get back to the income trust issue. I happen to believe that the government did the right thing in reversing itself on income trusts. Others on this panel think otherwise, I know, and certainly there's a vociferous and active senior group and investment lobby ready to turn income trusts into a big election dragon slayer. Liberal strategists have probably already written scripts for negative commercials portraying Stephen Harper as a bald-faced liar. But the income trust issue will not rise to the top of an election campaign because, and here is my prediction, income trusts will not become an election issue because there will be no federal election. The Harper Tories will continue to rule as a minority because neither the Bloc Québécois nor Jack Layton's New Democrats can sustain an election. With the rise of the Green Party, the New Democrats will continue to do deals with the Harper Tories. The Bloc will do the same. So what we have in federal politics is a so-called conservative government presiding over a policy regime in which taxes will not be cut and the role of government, especially on environmental issues, will be expanding. Green Tory means more big government, not less. The only thing left to wonder about is when the market-oriented and more libertarian members of the Conservative Party begin to publicly speak out and openly rebel against the Tory government that is clearly moving to the left. I predict that these voices will begin to be heard in greater numbers before the middle of the year. Thank you very much. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Terry. Next up, Peter Morton.
Unlike Terry, I'm not going to review my predictions from last year. I don't want to be the one to empty the room. So instead, I want to tell you a short little story. Some years ago, about 5 years ago, I went down to Biloxi, Mississippi, to do a story on a curious little creature called the Mississippi gopher frog. And the Mississippi gopher frog is named because it's the ultimate freeloader. It lives in abandoned gopher holes in the south, in these sink pond things. And its other curious trait is its mating call is an exact replica of a human male snoring. And I thought that was a pretty funny joke nature did. That's the only species that snores first before mating rather than afterwards. Anyways, there used to be hundreds and thousands of these frogs. And it came to a point in time, for various reasons, not the least of which is that these frogs have this thing about hot Mississippi nights and asphalt roads. It came down to a point where there were only 6 left. It was endangered species. They were hanging out in a pond called Jones's Pond, smack dab in the middle of the biggest development that Biloxi has seen since the riverboat casinos. And boy, were people mad. This community was going to have golf courses and malls and townhomes and big estates, but because it was endangered, the Army Corps of Engineers were involved, the Mississippi National Guard got into it, Sierra Club, Development, Biloxi councilors, everybody was mad. And when you went up to Jones's Pond, it looked like Guantanamo Bay for frogs. It was surrounded by yellow tape and then barbed wire, and no one was out there, no trespassing. And so they're sort of making some progress because it was, again, right in the middle. And then, of course, the trilogy of the American tragedy happened. There was 9/11, then there was Iraq, and then there was, well, obviously, Katrina. So everybody forgot about the frogs. Just whatever, never mind. So, and I think it illustrates a huge sea change in attitude in the U.S., where they've gone from caring about the plight of these frogs not bright enough to stay off of Mississippi Road at night, to this dark period of mistrust of their governments, of mistrust of people around the world, mistrust of everything. And I think it's translating this year into what you're going to see is a huge change in the political attitude there. That the Democrats won the House and won the Senate, not by much, but enough. And now this is their election for the presidential campaign in 2008. This is for theirs to lose. You know all the obvious candidates. Hillary is going to run. Edwards, who I think has got the edge at the moment. Maybe Barack's going to take a shot at it. On the Republican side, no one. It's just, no one's interesting. Richardson, the governor, maybe. John Kerry's dead in the water on the Democrat side, sorry. And interestingly, this is the first time in 80 years that no sitting president or vice president has tried to take back the White House. 1928 was the last time this happened. And it tells you that this administration is bailing out. This Condoleezza won't run, no one will run at all. They're just staying right out of it. Bush is going to spend this year going to Iraq to try to get out of Iraq. If that makes any sense, this week, probably tomorrow or Wednesday, he's going to announce, 20,000 more troops to go and try to sort something out over there. But I think before the end of the year, you're going to see a sizably smaller force there because the Republicans will be dead into next year if they don't get the boys home. That's the political side. On the economic side, I agree with Warren. I think it's slowing, but an economy with 300 million people who like to spend, it's not going to slow all that much, I can tell you. The housing market took a hit, but it should have taken a hit. If you're interested, there's some great deals out there now down in Florida. So I think the economy will chug along. Americans will watch the political agenda very, very carefully, and then they'll make their decisions to put a Democrat in. Again, I think it's Edwards. He's got experience. He shows well. Hillary, they don't like very much. Obama's just too new. No one knows where he stands. He'd be a good vice presidential candidate, probably. And that's about it on the political side. Now, on cross-border issues, I'm happy to report there's no softwood lumber dispute. So you can all relax now, except for the lawyers. They're really angry. So there's a funny little issue on LNG coming up on the East Coast in Passamaquoddy Bay. Americans want to build an LNG plant, but you can only get there through Canadian water, and we're against it, and so that'll be fun. And finally, get your passports if you're going to the States. Honest God, January 23rd, they won't let you in. They're real crabby these days. And finally, I'm happy to report, I just checked, my Mississippi Gulf frogs are fine. They survived Katrina, the administration. If they stay in their holes till after the next election, they'll be okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Peter. And before I call on Andrew, I'd just like to remind everyone of the Q&A session that will follow. Please be sure to put down your questions on the cards available at your tables. Once you're ready, hold your card up. There are folks passing through the audience to recover them, and they'll bring it forward in just a few moments. I'd now like to call upon our fourth panelist, Mr. Andrew Coyne. Andrew?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I'm here under false pretenses a bit. I'm not really in the prognostication game. I'm more in the finger-pointing, recriminations, and second-guessing game. So this business of actually having to look forward rather than to the immediate past is somewhat daunting to me. However, I will make one very confident prediction. This will be the year of the Canadian entrepreneur. I've just been told. Beyond that, unfortunately, it will also perhaps be the year of the political entrepreneur, indeed the year of the elections. You're going to be, by the end of this year, I suppose, have elections out your ears. not only very likely or possibly a federal election, and we'll discuss that with Terry later, but also certainly an Ontario election, very probably a Quebec election. If that were to come to pass, if we were to have all three of those major elections happening in 1 year, it would be the first time since 1908. Indeed, the first time we've had even two of them, the Feds and one of those two provinces together, since 1963. So this is potentially quite a historic year. Add in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, and PEI, all of whom may have elections this year, and maybe even Alberta. And boy, are we going to be sick of politics by the end of it. And I'm in the game to be writing about it. If we do have a federal election, it will be notable as well because it will be, in all likelihood, the most open and forward-looking election we've had in a generation or maybe even two. Recent elections, if you'll recall, have been either foregone conclusions, as in 97 or 2000, where there was really only one party that was going to win, or in the last two elections, they've been essentially backward-looking. We've been in the job of basically taking the Liberals to the woodshed, and it took two, it may take a three to punish them, but that was essentially what we were doing. But now we've got an election where we have essentially two parties, both of which are quite evenly matched in the polls, quite evenly matched in their representation in the House. Each of them has a relatively new leader, both of whom are remarkable for their intellect, their political savvy, their tenacity, and their propensity to take risks. And when have we been able to say that lately? So we have quite an interesting lineup between the two of them. The Tories have not been in long enough, really, to either establish themselves as the natural party of government or to totally alienate the public, although give them time. The Liberals, for their part, have spent some time in the penalty box. We'll decide, I suppose, whether it's been enough. And they've also had, I think, a remarkably successful convention, both in the sense of, I think, they chose an interesting leader who was hard to attach any kind of ethical failings to, and indeed it was kind of a cleansing experience. They really did decapitate most of the, if not all of the party establishment, which looked good on them. So you've got two parties now that have essentially put behind them, I think, some of their negatives from the past. So neither party, I think, will really be able to successfully campaign strictly against the other, just simply hurling mud for their alleged or real misdeeds in the past. Each of them is going to have to spell out what they would do if they were in power. You really probably have to go back to 1968 to find another one like it, the potential anyway, for an election that's actually about ideas, which of course means that it will be anything but. It will be a partisan mudfest, so what am I talking about? I will say, however, if there is an election, it will not be, I don't think, about the environment. As much as we're all jumping up and down because we happen to be in the middle of a warm spell, and everyone's eager to attribute that to global warming, I suppose we could also attribute the Leafs' winning streak to that as well, because they happen to coincide. But there's no particular reason why we should be attributing every warm spell to global warming. And I say that as a believer, unlike some of the people at this panel, in the global warming thesis. Nevertheless, there is a difference in politics between important issues, which obviously the environment is, and decisive ones. And we in the media always make this mistake that we listen to the pollsters, and the pollsters ask people and say, what are the issues that really matter to you? And people dutifully say, well, it's the environment or healthcare, because they think that's the answer they should be giving. And then they go into the ballot box and decide on something completely different. So do not make that mistake of thinking that because the environment is an important issue, that that's actually what the election is going to be about. People get that these are big, complicated issues. That's what makes them important. That's what makes them issues. And they don't believe that any party's got some simple magic bullet answer to it. Nobody ever won an election on health care, and I doubt very much they're going to win it on the environment. Certainly you can lose an election on these issues if you just look like you're not even in the game. And the Tories are certainly vulnerable on that issue, and they know it, which is why we've just seen some of the recent changes. But I think they also know, and I'm sure they've done the polling to find this out, that the public's interest in this is a mile wide and an inch deep. Everybody's in favor of doing something about the environment as long as somebody else pays for it. The same people who tell, 80% of the pollsters, they say 80% of them are very concerned about global warming, scream blue murder if the price of gas goes up a nickel. So the public are essentially hypocrites on this. The Tories know it. What they need to do is to give a convincing show of interest in the issue, make the appearance of action, a lot of motion, but it won't actually have to matter a whole lot because the public's not going to pay attention beyond the next few weeks. I was talking to a pollster the other day who says that they've been tracking this for the last 20 or 30 years. Interest in the environment always spikes in springtime and then subsides the rest of the year. We're interested in it when, the trees are in bloom, et cetera. The Liberals, for their part, don't necessarily want to bring up the issue either, given their own poor record on global warming, and given that it's an issue in which they will essentially be splitting the vote between themselves and the other three left-of-center parties. This is the great Tory advantage, or one of the advantages the Tories have right now is it's a disadvantage for them to have to face 3 or 4 parties opposite them in Parliament, because you have to get 50% of the vote in Parliament to get anything done. In an election, of course, all you have to get is maybe 40% or even less in Canadian elections. And so that division on the left actually speaks to their advantage. They can, let's take the environment. If the Liberals get into a bidding war with the other left-wing parties to see who can be the greenest, they risk making themselves look a little bit too single-minded, a little bit too fanatical about this. And the Tories, if they can, as I say, make a convincing show of action on it, can kind of inhabit the sort of sensible, realist, pragmatist center ground on the issue. The government also has the advantage in that they can define the agenda. And I may differ with Terry in that I think this budget may actually have something to say, because the Tories, if they're up in the polls, will have an interest in trying to bring in a budget that is so provocative, the other parties will have to vote against it. I guess I'm being given the time, so I'll end it right there. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And now, last but certainly not least, my pleasure to call Diane Francis to the podium.
It's a great crowd. I'm going to make you all feel good because I think we should feel good about living in this country. I'm going to recall a conversation I had with a Japanese investor, a very long-term investor. This was over a decade ago in Canada bonds. And I was saying to him, as we do, we kind of get our noses in the news business stuck into all the problems and the negatives in our society. But I said to him, you're investing on the long term, really long term. And why are you so? I mean, we have kinds of problems. We have free trade disputes with the United States. The U.S. doesn't look like it's in great shape. We're getting more and more immersed in their economy and more dependent on them. And, we've got a lot of issues. And he said, you know what? He said, Canada's the winner of what I call the reverse beauty contest. And I said, well, what's the reverse beauty contest? Well, he said, there are no such thing as beautiful countries and beautiful contestants in the beauty contest. So you pick the least ugly. Canada's the least ugly country in the world. And I really believe that's true. And we got a whole lot prettier in 2006 by electing the Tories and getting rid of the Liberals. I think 2007 is going to be another very good year. We did have a good year last year. We have some problem on the auto manufacturing side, but nothing that can't be overcome. And if you look at the late year job creation figures on both sides of the border, it's pretty terrific. The Canadian dollar will be volatile. It always has been, as Warren said so eloquently. Let's also remember we're in the third year of a U.S. presidency. The third year of a U.S. presidency historically has been the best for stock markets. The fourth year is the second best. The first is the third best. The second is the worst. Don't know why. Maybe they're gearing up spending. Maybe a lot of different reasons. But that's going to be the case again this year, hopefully, because it has been historically, and that always benefits us in many other ways. China and India, as Warren said, will continue to lead the world, will be doing all the heavy lifting on world growth. We should hope that they continue to do that. They represent 40% of humanity. They don't want to pull the ripcord. They're on our side. They want to be like us, and this is all good. And, of course, that also will translate by the year 2015 into a really stunning figure. By the year 2015, there will be 1 billion new consumers in the world. And at the same time, we will have scarce resources. So, hey, Canada just got prettier again. We have the resources, and that, of course, will mean this year and in future years, the West will be best, as Warren said. One caveat on this year, and Peter referred to it, is going to be this passport requirement. This is going to affect convention business and tourism, and it's going to affect it coming into Canada, I think, a little bit more than people realize, especially in this city. 75% of Americans don't have a passport. Most of them don't know how to get one. The American government at the postal stations are fiercely advertising the fact that to go anywhere you need a passport in order to get back into the country. But if you're a family of 4, it's a $600 to $700 expense on top of your Canadian planned vacation. So that's not going to be good. It also works in reverse. The Americans have exempted for the moment cruise ships and land crossings. So you don't need a passport if you're American coming by car into Canada back again or on a cruise ship thank heavens, but that's supposed to kick into 2009. In my opinion, this year will be another ugly year in the Middle East. And of course, the backdrop, it is the backdrop to the U.S. primaries that are going to be boring us to tears on CNN and everything else as all these candidates crowd to become nominees for the next one. In my opinion, it's going to be Edwards versus McCain. It's McCain's to lose, but he's very inconsistent, and he's also backing a new deployment of troops in Iraq, which is not popular at all. Giuliani on the Republican side is a comer to be careful and watch for. He's more central than the party, which may make him more appealing to Democrats. I think, like Andrew, I agree. I think we're going to have a spring or summer election here in Canada federally. I think Stephen Harper will win, maybe a majority, but for sure he'll increase seats and do better than he did before. In my opinion, and I know Stephen and Jim Flaherty and I know the gang, I'm very happy they're there. The only mistake that I see that they've made this year in their governance is the income trust mistake, taxation imposed. And I say that for two reasons. First of all, they didn't do their homework. If you exempt REITs because the Americans have, you have to exempt energy trusts because the Americans have an equivalent energy trust. So you put our energy sector at a disadvantage in terms of raising capital. The second thing is you don't do retroactive actions unless it's a national emergency. And to say no to Bell and TELUS would have been all that needed to be done and study how to grandfather the rest of it more gracefully, shall we say. But you know what? We'll get through it. It's not fatal. I think there'll be some offsets. They have to save face and stick by their guns. They gave a little wiggle room already, and there'll be more to come, I believe. And, you know, it's going to be a boon for Bay Street because they'll earn another $6 billion in fees, taking the income trusts back and creating something else out of them. So it's all good. We've lost some head offices to foreign owners, but we've gained some. Canadians continue to invest in the United States, out-investing the American investment in Canada, and that's all good news. So all in all, we are getting prettier and prettier as a country, and be happy, and I think we'll have a great year. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Well, we've got a good collection of questions from the audience, and we'll now have our panelists work from the table mics. And the first question, with some snappy answers so we can get through as many of these questions as possible, to either Terry or Andrew, involves government bureaucracy. And the question is, regardless of party, all Canadian governments have grown the size of our bureaucracies. Is there any hope for change on this front? Terry?
No.
That is snappy.
Maybe if they get a majority. The one interesting bright spot for me is longer term is, and this actually came in a Diane Francis interview with Jim Flaherty, when she asked him, looking down the road, what's your vision of Canada? What do you want to see Canada look like? And he looked at her and he said, Ireland. And if that's true, if that is what his long-term ambition is, then that would entail some really radical restructuring. But it's not going to happen before they have a majority.
Okay, thank you. Warren, a question for Warren. Are we looking at a recession in the United States?
No, our view is that's not going to happen. One of the comments was you should never discount the fundamental drive of American households to buy. We've already had a fairly big correction in the housing sector. Gasoline prices are lower, and that gives you a cash infusion. And at the end of the day, you've got a service sector that is extraordinarily large in that economy. And the service sector is much less prone to violent fluctuations one way or another, and that's why we expect growth to be just under 2.5% this year and probably a little bit stronger the following year.
Thank you. A question for Diane on Chinese and Indian growth, and the question from A. Storino. When do you see the China-India import phenomenon slowing down or reversing?
Well, I don't think it is. First of all, China has sort of compromised a little bit under pressure from the Americans to allow their currency to increase a bit. At the same token, they're keeping their currency down in order to facilitate trade with the U.S. by eating all the American dollars they can possibly get hold of, thereby helping the Americans live beyond their means. So it's sort of a virtuous cycle at the moment. India is doing tremendously well, really has its act together, and I think that we may see it outpace China. China's, going to be very careful about what it does. It not only has the 2008 Olympics, but it has the 2010 Shanghai World Fair, and so they are really being cautious, giving a little wiggle room to their people, not cracking down on human rights infractions and other kinds of things to the extent that I think many of us feared. So we've got to hope, as I say, that's 40% of the people on the planet. Let's hope that they continue to grow by 10%. They each have to create about 50,000 jobs a day to keep their employment rates at their current levels. So we can only hope they do that.
Yeah, can I just add a point? I don't know that it would be a good idea if China were somehow either forced or got into a situation where it did reduce its ability to export goods and products to the rest of the world, because they're a great source of well-being for us in Canada. Cheap products are good for Canadians, and we want to keep that happening, I think.
A question for Peter regarding presidential election prospects. What, if any, role will Al Gore have in the coming U.S. election?
Funny, we were just talking about that. He won't run, for sure. He knows his day in the sun is long since gone. But I think he's successfully marshalling the environmental agenda there. They want to get it back. The Republicans have pushed it as far away as they can, Kyoto. He wants to get it back by doing sort of the soft and cuddly approach to it. And I think you're going to see, especially on the Democratic side, the candidates try to embrace it without pushing too hard. They know there are vulnerabilities in the economy, so they're not going to be pushing for anything much past sort of the ethanol kinds of things, maybe more wind power. But I don't see it as a big issue, and Al will be out there, but he's not going to be a player.
Thank you, Peter. Another question for Warren, and it is a bit technical, but it says, your expectation on interest exchange rates for 2007 is around 84 cents. However, we would like to know your expectation about the range for 2007 end of the year, minimum, maximum.
Okay, now I'm not saying that we believe that the currency is going to stay around the current level. In fact, our end-of-year forecast is in the high 80s, and I do believe, as I said earlier, that you could easily have a 7 to 8% range on the currency this year. We've had a huge downdraft, very warm weather. Wait till the commodity market turns, and all of a sudden you're going to see another roller coaster ride in the currency. So year-end, I suspect will probably be 80, 89. My closet view is that it would be even higher than that, but I'm not allowed to say that anymore. So the bottom line is, fundamentally, I think the currency is going to end up significantly higher.
Thank you. A question for Diane involving fresh water and the prospects for Canada. The question specifically is, you suggest we have copious resources to be ready for 2015. What do you foresee happening to Canada's fresh water in the future?
Well, I think fresh water could be a great resource for us to export, but the difficulty is that the Americans have to give it a reasonable price. It's a matter of negotiation. Also, don't forget that we have that we share the Great Lakes with the Americans. So when we're looking at our numbers about fresh water, surface fresh water, half of the Great Lakes is also theirs, technically speaking. But nonetheless, it's a great opportunity. But it would require huge treaties, a separate treaty, because if you were, say, to build a pipeline from Manitoba to Texas or the U.S. Southeast, you would be involving the jurisdiction of hundreds of environmental and political agencies, governments, political parties. I mean, it would be pretty nightmarish in order to be able to pull that off. Manitoba had trouble even wheeling electricity down to Kansas because North Dakota wanted to take a piece of the action, and that was in the 80s. So these are very, very difficult things, but, when they need the water, they'll pay the right price, and we'll sell it to them.
Thank you, Diane. Question for Terry, which I'll just boil down to the brief question. So nothing will replace Kyoto?
Well, no, I do think something will be wrangled out of the international agreement process to replace Kyoto. It'll take perhaps a couple of years to do it, unless there's some kind of a dramatic breakdown in the ability of the different governments involved to come to an agreement, which is really an open question because there are so many totally different interests in the future of emissions. What China wants, what India wants, what Mexico wants, they're completely apart. And the capacity of the international system to negotiate an agreement that makes some kind of sense is a bit iffy, but I think they're going to want to have an agreement come hell or high water, so they will have something within 3 years, maybe.
Can I just
Diane,
interject something, too? You know, there's something that's happening in the world. I have a colleague that I met down in New York who's now in Hong Kong. She runs a website with bloggers from inside China. There was something like 2,500 protests that involved police, violence, jailings, because parents in China, who can only have one child each, are very concerned about the level of pollution and the fact that their kids are getting asthma. So we may see something happening in these very culprit countries that are now not restrained in any way, shape, or form, even though they're not democratic. So you have a different China now, and you have these families with one little prince and one little princess, and they want a nice quality of living too. So I think stay tuned to that.
Thank you. Final question to Andrew, and the question reads, so Andrew, it sounds like there's nothing to vote for, only issues to vote against. This is in the federal.
I'm not as pessimistic as that. As I say, I don't think we've seen two party leaders like this for some time, and their instincts, I think, are to take risks. They're certainly familiar with issues in a way that many politicians are not. They have an interest in them more so than most. And as I say, the slate is cleaner than it's been in the past. As I say, I don't want to get my hopes up because I'm sure we'll drag them down to our level. But the potential is there, as in few elections in my lifetime, for an actual debate of ideas. The last one was really 1988, and even that was essentially free trade versus not free trade. Whereas this one, as I say, I'm not suggesting there's going to be some dramatic, world-shaking ideas come forth, but at least it'll be a contest of ideas. I'm hoping anyway.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, panelists. Thanks to all of you for the questions. Before I turn the podium back to Noella, who'll adjourn the meeting, I'd just like to remind everybody about a couple of things to do before you head back to the office. Make sure you first get a copy of Warren Justin's full economic report for the year ahead, as well as a copy of the special edition that appears in the National Post today, commemorating the official launch of Roy Natt's Year of the Canadian Entrepreneur Initiative that Earl spoke about earlier. Volunteers will be handing out copies at the door as you leave. Please make time to fill out the poll question cards that are on your table for a chance to voice your opinion. Again, those of you who do will be entered into a draw for a chance to win an Apple iPod Nano, courtesy of our presenting sponsor, Roy Natt Capital. The poll cards can be left at your table upon departure. Our volunteers will pick them up. Also, be sure to take advantage of the special subscription offer National Post has provided exclusively for you all today. It will entitle you to a 90-day complimentary subscription if you do not already have one, as you all should. But now I'd like to thank all of our panelists for sharing their outlooks with us today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you once again to Noella Milne and the Canadian Club of Toronto, David Asper and the National Post, and Earl Landy, Roy Natt Capital and Scotiabank Commercial Banking for putting on a great event. Noella, would you like to adjourn the meeting?
Thank you, Peter, for a great job, too. Please join me in applauding and thanking our panel for doing such a great job at such a tricky task. And thank you as well to Rogers Broadcasting for carrying this event live today, and of course a big thanks to the Financial Post, Roy Natt Capital and Scotiabank for making this event possible for another year. Welcome to 2007 and have a great afternoon.